Marcus Thompson never imagined that answering a simple phone call on a rainy Tuesday morning would change everything. The voice on the other end belonged to Sarah Martinez from Child Protective Services, and her words would shatter his quiet, predictable world in ways he couldn't have foreseen. Two 7-year-old twins, Emma and Ethan Parker, needed emergency placement. Their grandmother, who had been their guardian since their parents died in a car accident 2 years prior, had suffered a massive stroke and was fighting for her life in intensive care. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus had been a licensed foster parent for 3 years, but he'd never taken in children before. The certification had been Rebecca's idea, his late wife, who believed they could make a difference in young lives while they struggled with their own fertility issues. After Rebecca's sudden death from cancer 18 months ago, Marcus had kept the certification active, though he'd never actually said yes to a placement. Until now, the rain drummed against the windows of Marcus's modest 2-story house in suburban Portland, Oregon, creating a steady rhythm that had become the soundtrack to his solitary existence. At 34, he'd grown accustomed to the silence that filled every corner of the home he'd once shared with Rebecca. The house felt too big for one person, yet too small to contain all the memories that seemed to echo from every room. Marcus worked as a software engineer for a tech company downtown, a job that allowed him the flexibility to work from home most days. It had been perfect when Rebecca was going through chemotherapy. He could be there for her appointments, hold her hand during the difficult moments, and pretend that their world wasn't falling apart one treatment at a time. Now, the flexibility felt more like isolation, and the quiet hum of his computer had become his primary companion. The call from Sarah Martinez came at 9:47 a.m., interrupting his third cup of coffee and a particularly frustrating debugging session. He almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers usually meant telemarketers or wrong numbers, but something made him pick up, and Sarah's professional yet urgent voice cut through his morning fog. "Mr. Thompson, I know this is sudden, but we have an emergency situation. 2 children need immediate placement, and you're one of the few certified homes in the area that could accommodate siblings. Are you available to discuss this?" Marcus's first instinct was to say no. He'd maintained his foster certification more out of habit than intention, a way to keep Rebecca's dream alive, even though his own motivation had died with her. But Sarah's voice carried a weight that made him pause. These weren't just statistics or case files. They were real children who needed help. "What's the situation?" he found himself asking, already knowing he was stepping into something that would complicate his carefully controlled existence. Sarah explained the circumstances. Emma and Ethan Parker had been living with their maternal grandmother, Dorothy, in a small apartment across town. Their parents, Jennifer and Michael Parker, had died in a head-on collision with a drunk driver during a family vacation to the coast. Dorothy had stepped up immediately, taking in the twins. Despite her advanced age and limited resources, she'd been their anchor, their source of stability in a world that had suddenly become unpredictable and scary. But Dorothy was 78 years old, and the stress of raising 2 young children while dealing with her own grief had taken its toll. The stroke had come without warning. She'd collapsed while making breakfast for the twins, and they'd found her on the kitchen floor, unconscious and barely breathing. Emma had called 911 while Ethan sat beside their grandmother, holding her hand and whispering that everything would be okay. "They're at the hospital now," Sarah continued. "They've been there since yesterday, sleeping in the waiting room chairs. The medical staff has been incredibly kind, but they can't stay there indefinitely. Dorothy is in critical condition, and even if she recovers, it's unlikely she'll be able to care for them again." Marcus closed his eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what these children had endured. In just 2 years, they'd lost their parents and now faced losing the only family they had left. The practical part of his mind started listing all the reasons why he wasn't equipped for this. He'd never parented anyone. His house wasn't child-proofed. He had no experience with trauma or grief counseling. But underneath those logical protests, something else stirred. A recognition of loss that he understood all too well. How long would they need placement, he asked, though he wasn't sure why the duration mattered. These children needed help, and he was in a position to provide it. It's hard to say, Sarah admitted. If Dorothy recovers, it could be weeks or months. If she doesn't... She left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. These children might need a permanent home, not just a temporary shelter. Marcus looked around his quiet house, at the spare bedroom that had once been intended as a nursery, at the dining room table that had seemed too large for one person every night for the past 18 months. Rebecca used to say that their house was meant for a family, that the extra bedrooms and the big backyard were just waiting for the right children to fill them with laughter and chaos. "I'll need to meet them first," he said, surprising himself, with the certainty in his voice. "And they'll need to feel comfortable with the arrangement. But if it's a good fit, yes, I can take them in." Sarah's relief was audible through the phone. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I know this isn't easy, and I want you to know that we'll provide all the support you need. Can you meet us at the hospital this afternoon, around 2 o'clock? After hanging up, Marcus sat in his kitchen, staring at the rain-streaked windows and wondering what he'd just committed to. His orderly, predictable life was about to be turned upside down by 2 children he'd never met. Children who were carrying their own heavy burden of loss and uncertainty. He spent the morning researching everything he could about caring for traumatized children, about the foster system, about what 7-year-olds needed both practically and emotionally. He made lists of supplies he'd need to buy, of changes he'd need to make to his house, of questions he should ask Sarah about the children's specific needs and history. But as the afternoon approached, Marcus found himself thinking less about logistics and more about Rebecca. She would have known exactly what to do, would have already been planning how to make the children feel welcome and safe. She'd had a gift for nurturing, for seeing what people needed before they even knew it themselves. Marcus had always been better with problems that could be solved with code and logic, but this situation required something more intuitive, more emotional. The drive to the hospital felt longer than usual, despite the familiar route. Marcus's hands gripped the steering wheel as he rehearsed what he might say to Emma and Ethan, how he could possibly explain to 2 7-year-olds that another adult in their lives was offering to take care of them, at least temporarily. How do you tell children who've already lost so much that they might need to trust yet another stranger? The pediatric wing of Portland General Hospital buzzed with the controlled chaos that Marcus remembered from Rebecca's treatments. The smell of antiseptic and floor wax brought back memories he'd tried to bury, but he pushed through them, focusing on the present moment and the children who needed his attention. Sarah Martinez was exactly what Marcus had imagined. Professional, but warm, with the kind of tired eyes that spoke of too many difficult cases and not enough happy endings. She met him at the elevator, carrying a folder thick with paperwork and wearing the expression of someone who dealt with family crises every day, but never quite got used to them. "They're in the family lounge on the 3rd floor," she explained, as they rode up together. "I should warn you, they're very protective of each other, and they've been through more than most adults could handle. Emma tends to be the spokesperson for both of them, while Ethan is quieter but incredibly observant. They're both very mature for their age, which isn't necessarily a good thing." The family lounge was a cheerfully decorated space that tried too hard to mask the underlying sadness of its purpose. Bright murals covered the walls, and child-sized furniture was scattered throughout, but the room still felt heavy with the weight of families in crisis. In one corner, near a window that looked out over the hospital's memorial garden, two small figures sat curled together on a love seat that dwarfed them. Emma and Ethan Parker looked like two halves of the same person, with the same dark hair, the same serious brown eyes, and the same way of holding themselves as if they were ready to face whatever came next. Emma had her arm around her brother's shoulders, and Ethan leaned into her side, both of them staring out the window with the kind of patience that came from too much waiting and uncertainty. Marcus felt his chest tighten as he looked at them. They were so small, so vulnerable, yet there was something in their posture that spoke of resilience and determination. These weren't just children. They were survivors, and they'd learned to rely on each other in ways that most siblings never had to. Sarah approached them gently, her voice soft but clear. "Emma, Ethan, I'd like you to meet someone. This is Mr. Thompson, and he's here because he might be able to help you both while Grandma Dot is getting better." Both children looked up simultaneously, their identical brown eyes studying Marcus, with an intensity that made him feel like he was being evaluated for something far more important than he could possibly understand. Emma straightened slightly, her protective instincts clearly activated, while Ethan pressed closer to his sister but continued to watch Marcus with curious, wary eyes. "Hi," Emma said, her voice carrying a maturity that seemed wrong for someone. "So young. Are you going to be our new foster dad?" The directness of the question caught Marcus off guard. He'd expected small talk, maybe some games or activities to help them get comfortable with each other. Instead, this 7-year-old was cutting straight to the heart of the matter with the kind of pragmatism that spoke of too much experience, with adult conversations about her future. "I'm hoping we can get to know each other first," Marcus replied, settling into a chair across from them so he wouldn't loom over their small forms. "And then, if everyone feels good about it, maybe I could take care of you both for a while. Would that be something you'd be interested in?" Emma and Ethan exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation, one of those sibling communications that happened without words, full of shared understanding and unspoken agreements. Marcus watched this silent exchange with fascination, recognizing the kind of bond that his and Rebecca's relationship had developed over years of marriage. These children had created their own language of survival. "Do you have other kids?" Ethan asked suddenly, his voice softer than his sister's, but equally serious. "No," Marcus answered honestly. "It would just be the 3 of us." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Do you know how to take care of kids? Emma's follow-up question came immediately, as if she and Ethan had rehearsed this interview. Marcus smiled slightly at her thoroughness. "I'm still learning, but I want to do a good job. I lost someone very important to me too, so I understand that sometimes life changes in ways we don't expect." This admission seemed to shift something in the room. Emma's shoulders relaxed slightly, and Ethan leaned forward, showing the first real interest in the conversation. "Who did you lose?" Ethan asked, his question delivered with the kind of innocent directness that only children possessed. "My wife," Marcus said simply. "Her name was Rebecca, and she died about 1.5 years ago. We lived in a house that was meant for a family, but it's been very quiet since she's been gone." Emma and Ethan exchanged another one of their wordless conversations, and Marcus found himself holding his breath, waiting for their verdict. These children had already endured more instability than anyone should have to face, and he knew that their trust wouldn't come easily or automatically. "Would we have our own rooms?" Emma asked, and Marcus recognized the question as both practical and emotional. These children needed space that belonged to them, places where they could feel safe and settled. "Yes," Marcus nodded. "There are 2 bedrooms upstairs that would be yours. You could decorate them however you wanted, and we could..." Go shopping for anything you needed to make them feel like home. For the first time since he'd entered the room, both children smiled. Small, tentative expressions that transformed their serious faces and gave Marcus a glimpse of who they might be when they weren't carrying the weight of loss and uncertainty. 2. Conversation continued for another hour, with Sarah occasionally interjecting with practical questions and the children asking everything from whether Marcus knew how to cook pancakes to whether he had a dog to whether he would let them visit their grandmother in the hospital. Marcus answered everything honestly, admitting when he didn't know something and promising to learn whatever he needed to learn. By the time they were ready to leave the hospital, something had shifted. Emma and Ethan were still cautious, clearly processing this major change in their lives, but they'd agreed to come home with Marcus for a trial period. They would spend the weekend getting to know each other, and if everyone felt comfortable, they would make the arrangement more permanent while they waited for news about Dorothy's recovery. As Marcus helped them gather their few belongings, a backpack each containing clothes, a shared tablet, and a worn photo of their parents, he realized that his quiet, controlled world was about to become something entirely different. These children would bring noise and questions and needs that he'd never had to consider. They would disrupt his routines and challenge his assumptions about what his life was supposed to look like. But as he watched Emma help Ethan zip up his backpack, as he saw the way they automatically reached for each other's hands when they felt uncertain, Marcus began to understand that maybe disruption was exactly what his life needed. Maybe Rebecca had been right all along. Maybe their house had been waiting for the right family to fill it. The drive back to his house was quiet, with both children staring out the windows at the Portland neighborhoods rolling past. Marcus found himself seeing his own city through their eyes, wondering what they were thinking, what they were hoping for, what they were afraid of. These weren't just children he was taking in. They were individuals with their own histories, their own dreams, their own ways of processing the world. As they turned into his driveway, Marcus realized that this moment marked the end of one chapter of his life and the beginning of something completely unknown. For the first time since Rebecca's death, his future felt unpredictable, full of possibilities that scared and excited him in equal measure. The first night was a disaster. Marcus had prepared as much as he could in the few hours between leaving the hospital and bedtime. He'd rushed to Target, buying twin bedsheets, basic toiletries, and enough frozen meals to last a week. He'd moved boxes out of the spare bedrooms and attempted to make the spaces feel welcoming with the limited resources at his disposal. But nothing had prepared him for the reality of two traumatized children trying to sleep in a stranger's house. Emma refused to be separated from Ethan, insisting they both sleep in the same room despite Marcus's offer of individual spaces. When he suggested they take the larger bedroom, she shook her head firmly and pointed to the smaller one, closer to the bathroom, she explained, and with a better view of the hallway. Marcus began to understand that these weren't arbitrary preferences, but survival strategies developed over months of uncertainty. The crying started around midnight, not the loud, dramatic sobbing Marcus might have expected, but the quiet, heartbroken whimpering of children trying not to disturb anyone while their world fell apart. He stood outside their door for 20 minutes, unsure whether his presence would comfort or frighten them, before finally knocking softly. "Can I come in?" he whispered through the door. Emma's voice came back, thick with tears but trying to sound composed. "We're okay. Ethan just misses Grandma Dot." Marcus opened the door anyway, finding both children huddled together in Emma's bed, their faces streaked with tears they'd tried to hide. The sight of them, so small and brave and utterly heartbroken, hit him like a physical blow. Without thinking, he sat on the edge of the bed. "It's okay to miss her," he said gently, "and it's okay to be scared. This is all very new and different." You going to send us back if we're too much trouble?" Ethan asked, his voice barely audible. The question revealed so much about what these children had learned to expect from adults. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, a protective instinct he didn't know he possessed. "No," he said firmly. "You're not in trouble, and I'm not going anywhere. We're going to figure this out together, okay?" That night, Marcus ended up sleeping in the chair in their room, just so they wouldn't feel alone in the dark. It wasn't comfortable, and his back ached terribly in the morning, but hearing their breathing slowly settle into the rhythm of sleep made every cramped muscle worth it. The next few days were a crash course in parenting that no manual could have prepared him for. Emma and Ethan were remarkably well-behaved children, but they carried their trauma in ways that broke Marcus's heart. Emma had appointed herself as Ethan's protector, constantly checking on him, making sure he ate, monitoring his moods like a tiny therapist. Ethan, meanwhile, had developed a habit of hoarding food in his pockets, sneaking extra granola bars and crackers when he thought no one was looking. Marcus learned to navigate their routines through trial and error. Emma needed structure and clear expectations. She thrived when she knew what came next, when she could prepare for transitions and changes. Ethan needed physical comfort and reassurance. He sought out hugs and would unconsciously reach for Marcus's hand when they walked anywhere together. The visit to Dorothy's bedside became a daily ritual. The hospital staff had grown fond of the twins, and the ICU nurses bent the rules to allow extended visits. Dorothy remained unconscious, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical persistence, but Emma and Ethan would sit beside her bed every afternoon, telling her about their day, reading her stories, brushing her hair with gentle, careful fingers. "She taught me how to braid," Emma explained to Marcus one afternoon, working her small fingers through Dorothy's silver hair. "She said every girl should know how to take care of her own hair and help other people with theirs, too." Marcus watched from the doorway, struck by the tenderness in Emma's movements and the way Ethan held Dorothy's hand while his sister worked. These children had learned to give comfort in the face of helplessness, to find small ways to care for someone who couldn't care for them in return. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, Dorothy's neurologist, was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and the gentle authority that came from years of delivering difficult news to families. She pulled Marcus aside after their fourth visit, her expression serious but not unkind. "I want to be honest with you about Dorothy's prognosis," she said quietly, glancing toward the room where Emma and Ethan were arranging fresh flowers they'd picked from Marcus's garden. "The stroke was massive, and while she's stable, the likelihood of her regaining consciousness is very small. Even if she does wake up, the level of care she would need would be beyond what most families can provide." Marcus nodded, though the news settled like a stone in his stomach. He'd hoped for a different outcome, not just for Dorothy's sake, but for the children who loved her so fiercely. "How long do we wait?" he asked. "There's no timeline for these things," Dr. Hendricks replied. "Some families choose to maintain life support indefinitely. Others make the difficult decision to focus on comfort care. But that decision would ultimately fall to Dorothy's legal guardian or next of kin." The weight of this information felt enormous. Marcus realized that he was stepping into more than just temporary childcare. He was becoming part of decisions that would shape these children's entire future. Meanwhile, at home, small moments of normalcy began to emerge between the hospital visits and the grief. Marcus discovered that both children were excellent students who took their schoolwork seriously, even in the midst of personal chaos. Emma loved to read and had already devoured half the books in Marcus's modest home library. Ethan was fascinated by Marcus's computer setup and asked endless questions about programming and how software worked. "Could you teach me to make games?" Ethan asked one evening, perched on Marcus's desk chair while Emma did homework at the kitchen table. "Sure, but it takes a lot of practice and patience," Marcus replied, pulling up a basic coding tutorial designed for children. "I have lots of patience," Ethan said seriously. "Grandma Dot said patience is what you need when good things take a long time to happen." The simple wisdom in Dorothy's words, filtered through Ethan's 7-year-old perspective, hit Marcus unexpectedly hard. These children carried their grandmother's teachings like treasures, small pieces of guidance that helped them navigate a world that had become unpredictable and frightening. Cooking became another adventure entirely. Marcus's culinary skills extended to ordering takeout and microwaving frozen meals. But Emma and Ethan had been accustomed to Dorothy's home cooking, simple but nutritious meals made with love and attention. His first attempt at spaghetti resulted in a pot of overcooked noodles and sauce that tasted like it came straight from the jar. Emma ate it politely, but Ethan pushed his food around his plate with obvious disappointment. "Grandma Dot puts sugar in the sauce," Ethan offered helpfully, "and she makes the noodles not so mushy." "Would you like to teach me how she makes it?" Marcus asked, and both children's faces lit up with the first genuine excitement he'd seen since they'd arrived. The next evening, Emma stood on a step stool, directing operations while Ethan carefully measured ingredients. They worked together with the kind of seamless cooperation that spoke of many evenings spent helping their grandmother in the kitchen. Marcus found himself learning not just about cooking, but about the rhythms and traditions that had made these children feel secure and loved. "She always lets us crack the eggs," Emma explained, demonstrating the proper technique. "And we take turns stirring, because stirring is the most important part." As they cooked together, stories emerged. Dorothy's house had smelled like cinnamon and vanilla because she baked cookies every Sunday. She had a special chair by the window where she would sit with her coffee every morning, and the children would bring her their dreams from the night before to discuss and interpret. She sang old songs while she folded laundry, songs her own mother had taught her decades earlier. Marcus began to understand that Dorothy hadn't just been a caregiver for Emma and Ethan. She had been their anchor, their source of stability and tradition in a world that had already taken too much from them. The children weren't just grieving her current absence. They were facing the potential loss of an entire way of life, a set of routines and rituals that had made them feel safe and connected to something larger than their immediate circumstances. The breakthrough came during their second week together, in the most unexpected way. Marcus had been struggling with a particularly difficult coding problem at work, the kind of logical puzzle that usually energized him, but now felt overwhelming given everything else on his mind. He was muttering at his computer screen when Ethan appeared at his elbow, studying the lines of code with intense concentration. "It's like a recipe," Ethan observed after several minutes of silent watching. "Each step has to happen in the right order, or the whole thing won't work." The simplicity of his observation cut straight to the heart of the problem Marcus had been wrestling with for hours. He looked at the code with fresh eyes, seeing the logical sequence that he'd been overcomplicating, and within minutes had identified and fixed the error. "You're absolutely right," Marcus said, turning to face Ethan with genuine amazement. "How did you see that so quickly?" Ethan shrugged, but Marcus could see the pride in his expression. "Grandma Dot says I notice things other people miss. She says it's because I listen with my eyes." That evening, as they prepared dinner together, a meal that actually resembled Dorothy's cooking thanks to the children's guidance, Marcus realized something fundamental had shifted. He was no longer just providing shelter for two displaced children. He was learning from them, being changed by their presence in ways he hadn't anticipated. Emma had begun leaving him little notes around the house, reminders about Ethan's preference for orange juice over apple, observations about which TV shows made them both laugh, small drawings of their daily activities. She was documenting their new life together, creating a record of their shared experiences that felt both touching and necessary. Ethan had claimed the chair next to Marcus's computer as his own special spot, where he would sit quietly working, on homework or drawing, while Marcus coded. His presence was comfortable and undemanding, but Marcus found himself explaining his work aloud, talking through problems and solutions in a way that helped clarify his own thinking. The house that had felt too empty for one person now buzzed with activity and conversation. Mornings began with the sound of small feet on the stairs and the ongoing negotiation between Emma and Ethan about everything from breakfast choices to who got to feed the neighbor's cat that had started visiting their back door. Evenings ended with bedtime stories that gradually extended as both children grew more comfortable asking questions and sharing their own thoughts about the books they read together. But the hospital visits remained the most challenging part of their routine. Dorothy's condition hadn't changed, and the children's hope and determination were heartbreaking to witness. They brought her pictures they'd drawn, read her their favorite books, and maintained a steady stream of chatter about their new life. "With Marcus, we're learning to make your meatloaf recipe," Emma would tell Dorothy's still form. "Marcus burns things sometimes, but we're teaching him. And Ethan is learning about computers. You would be so proud of how smart he is." Marcus often found himself wondering what Dorothy would think of their arrangement, whether she would approve of the way he was caring for her beloved grandchildren. He had no experience with the kind of nurturing these children needed, no natural instinct for the emotional complexities of childhood trauma. But he was learning, guided by Emma's fierce protectiveness and Ethan's quiet wisdom, by their willingness to teach him how to love them in the ways they needed to be loved. 3 weeks into their new life together, Marcus received a call that would change everything once again. Sarah Martinez's voice was gentle but serious when she delivered the news that Dorothy's family in Ohio, distant relatives who hadn't been in contact for years, had learned about the situation and were considering petitioning for custody of the twins. The news about Dorothy's relatives in Ohio hit like a sledgehammer to Marcus's carefully constructed sense of security. Richard and Linda Pemberton were Dorothy's nephew and his wife, a couple in their late 40s who owned a small hardware store in Columbus. They had heard about Dorothy's condition through a cousin who had seen the obituary notice for Dorothy's husband years earlier and had been keeping loose tabs on the family through social media. Sarah Martinez sat across from Marcus in his living room, her briefcase open and filled with documents that could determine Emma and Ethan's future. The children were at school, giving the adults time to discuss the complexities of custody law and family rights without little ears listening to. Conversations that would inevitably frighten them. "The Pembertons have a legitimate claim," Sarah explained, her professional tone not quite masking her personal frustration with the timing. "Blood relatives typically have preference in custody decisions, especially when there are no existing guardianship documents specifying otherwise. Dorothy never legally designated a successor guardian, which means the court will have to determine what's in the children's best interest." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that had become his body's automatic response to loss and uncertainty. Just when Emma and Ethan were beginning to settle, just when they were all finding their rhythm as an unlikely family, the possibility of another upheaval loomed like a storm cloud. "What do the Pembertons want?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. "They're flying out next week to meet the children and assess the situation," Sarah replied. "They seem well-intentioned. They have 2 teenage children of their own, a stable home, and the financial means to care for Emma and Ethan. On paper, they represent everything a court looks for in permanent guardians." The phrase "on paper" echoed in Marcus's mind as he walked through his house after Sarah left. Everything in his life with the twins existed in the spaces between official documents and legal definitions. The way Emma automatically saved the last bite of dessert for him, having observed that he often forgot to eat when he was focused on work. The way Ethan had started leaving small drawings on Marcus's pillow, stick figures of the three of them, holding hands under a crayon sun. The evening routine they'd developed, where Marcus would check for monsters under beds, while Emma made sure all the nightlights were working properly. None of these moments would show up in a court evaluation, but they represented the foundation of trust and affection that had grown between them over the past month. Marcus realized with startling clarity that somewhere along the way he had stopped thinking of Emma and Ethan as temporary residents in his home. They had become his children in every way that mattered to him, and the thought of losing them felt like facing another devastating death. That evening he struggled with how much to tell them about the Pembertons' visit. Emma's ability to read adult moods meant that she immediately sensed something was wrong, and her questioning became more persistent as the night wore on. "Is Grandma Dot getting worse?" she asked during dinner, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth as she studied Marcus's face. "No, honey, her condition is the same," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Then why do you look like you did that day when you had to tell us about your computer being broken?" Ethan chimed in, demonstrating once again his uncanny ability to notice details that adults thought they were hiding. Marcus put down his own fork and looked at both children, their identical brown eyes fixed on him with the kind of attention that demanded honesty. They had already survived having important information withheld from them, had already lived through the experience of adults making decisions about their lives without including them in the conversation. "There are some people who want to meet you," he said carefully. "Their family, Dorothy's nephew and his wife. They live in Ohio and they're wondering if maybe you might want to come live with them." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, fear, anger, and finally a kind of determined blankness that Marcus recognized as her protective mask. Ethan's eyes filled with tears that he tried to blink away, his small hands gripping his fork so tightly that his knuckles went white. "We don't want to go to Ohio," Emma said finally, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had appointed herself spokesperson for both of them. "We want to stay here with you." "I want that too," Marcus said, and the admission felt like stepping off a cliff. But sometimes adults have to follow rules about families and who takes care of children. These people are your blood relatives, which means they have rights that I don't have. "What kind of rights?" Ethan asked, his voice small and confused. Marcus struggled to explain family law to a 7-year-old without scaring him further. "Well, courts believe that children should be with their family members when possible. Since I'm not related to you by blood, a judge might decide that you should live with people who are." Emma stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "That's stupid," she declared with more force than Marcus had ever heard her use. "You take care of us. You make sure we eat vegetables and help with homework and read us stories. You sleep in the chair when we have bad dreams. That makes you family." The simple logic of her argument hit Marcus squarely in the heart. Emma was right. Family wasn't just about shared DNA or legal documents. It was about showing up every day, about learning someone's favorite foods and biggest fears, about being present in the moments that mattered. But the legal system operated on different principles, and Marcus knew that his feelings about the situation wouldn't necessarily carry weight in a custody hearing. He spent the next several days researching his options, consulting with lawyers, and trying to understand what rights he might have as a foster parent who had developed a significant relationship with his charges. The answer was both encouraging and terrifying. He could petition to adopt Emma and Ethan, but doing so would mean entering into a legal battle with blood relatives who had a stronger initial claim. The process would be expensive, emotionally draining, and far from guaranteed to succeed. Worse, it would put Emma and Ethan in the middle of a custody fight that could last months or even years. Richard and Linda Pemberton arrived on a Thursday morning, renting a car at the airport and driving straight to Sarah Martinez's office for their initial meeting with the caseworker. Marcus had volunteered to bring Emma and Ethan after school, giving the adults time to discuss the situation before the children were introduced to their potential new guardians. Sarah called Marcus around lunchtime with an update that did nothing to ease his anxiety. "They seem like genuinely nice people," she reported. "They're concerned about the children's welfare, they have experience raising kids, and they're financially stable." Linda actually teared up when I showed her photos of Emma and Ethan from their file. "But," Marcus prompted, hearing the hesitation in Sarah's voice, "but they also seem to have very definite ideas about what's best for the children without having met them yet. They're already talking about enrolling them in new schools, getting them involved in church activities, introducing them to their cousins. They mean well, but they're approaching this like the children are starting with a blank slate." Marcus understood the implication. The Pembertons saw Emma and Ethan as children who needed to be rescued and reformed, not as individuals who had already begun building a new life that deserved to be respected and maintained. That afternoon, Marcus sat in his car outside the children's school, watching other parents collect their kids and drive away to predictable routines and secure futures. When Emma and Ethan emerged from the building, their backpacks bouncing and their faces animated as they discussed something that had happened in art class, Marcus felt a fierce protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. "Are we meeting the Ohio people today?" Emma asked as she buckled her seatbelt, her tone carefully neutral. "Yes, but just for a little while," Marcus replied. "Sarah wants everyone to meet each other, but there's no pressure. You can ask them questions. Tell them about yourselves. See how you feel. What if we don't like them?" Ethan asked from the back seat. "Then we'll figure out what to do next," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure what options they would actually have. The meeting took place in a conference room at the Child Services building, a space that tried to be welcoming but still felt institutional and formal. Richard Pemberton was a tall man with graying hair and the kind of firm handshake that spoke of years in retail management. Linda was smaller and softer, with kind eyes and a nervous energy that made her fidget with her purse strap. Throughout the introductions, Emma and Ethan sat close together on one side of the conference table, their identical expressions of polite wariness making them look older than their 7 years. Marcus sat beside them, close enough to offer support, but not so close that he appeared to be claiming territory. "We're so excited to meet you both," Linda began, her voice bright with forced cheer. "We've heard so much about you from Sarah, and we've been looking forward to this for weeks." Emma nodded politely but didn't smile. Ethan leaned slightly closer to Marcus, a movement so subtle that only someone who knew him well would have noticed it. Richard launched into a description of their life in Columbus, the house with the big backyard, the good schools, the youth, programs at their church, the cousins who were eager to meet them. Linda added details about the bedrooms they had prepared, the toys they had purchased, the activities they had planned for the children's first weeks in Ohio. As the Pembertons talked, Marcus watched Emma's face grow increasingly closed off. These well-meaning adults were describing a life that sounded perfectly reasonable on paper, but they were talking about Emma and Ethan as if they were interchangeable with any other children, as if their specific needs and preferences and relationships were obstacles to be overcome, rather than foundations to be built upon. "Do you have any questions for us?" Richard asked after finishing his presentation about their family's Sunday dinner traditions. Emma looked at Ethan, and Marcus saw one of their silent conversations pass between them. Finally, Emma straightened in her chair and fixed the Pembertons with a direct stare. "Would we be able to visit Grandma Dot in the hospital?" she asked. Linda and Richard exchanged a glance before Richard answered. "Well, sweetheart, Ohio is pretty far from Portland. It would be difficult to visit regularly, but we could talk to the doctors about the best way to say goodbye before we leave." "Say goodbye?" Ethan's voice cracked on the words. "She's our grandma," Emma said, her composure finally showing cracks. "We can't just leave her." Linda reached across the table as if to comfort Emma, but the little girl pulled back instinctively. "Honey, I know this is hard, but sometimes we have to make difficult choices for the good of everyone involved. You need stability and a permanent home, and your grandmother needs medical care that the doctors can provide better than anyone else." "She needs us," Emma insisted, tears starting to flow despite her efforts to stay strong. "We read to her every day. We brush her hair. We tell her about school and what we learned and what we ate for lunch. How is she going to know we're okay if we're not there?" The question hung in the air, exposing the fundamental difference in how the adults in the room understood the children's situation. The Pembertons saw Dorothy as a tragic but temporary chapter that needed to be closed so Emma and Ethan could move forward. Marcus understood that Dorothy was a living connection to everything the children had lost, a relationship that gave meaning to their daily struggles and hope for their future. The meeting ended with polite promises to stay in touch and consider everyone's best interests, but Marcus knew that the battle lines had been drawn. The Pembertons were good people who could provide material security and family connections, but they couldn't offer continuity with the life Emma and Ethan had been building in Portland. That night, after the children had finally fallen asleep, following hours of whispered conversations and barely contained anxiety, Marcus made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. He called the family lawyer Rebecca had used for their estate planning and scheduled an appointment to discuss adoption procedures and custody rights. He was going to fight for Emma and Ethan, not because he had any guarantee of winning, but because he had learned something important over the past month. Love wasn't just about wanting to protect someone. It was about being willing to risk everything to give them the life they deserved. And Emma and Ethan deserved to finish growing up in the home where they had already begun to heal, with the adult who had already committed to learning how to love them exactly as they were. Attorney Margaret Chen had handled Rebecca's estate planning 3 years earlier, and Marcus remembered her as someone who combined sharp legal intelligence with genuine compassion for her client's personal circumstances. Her downtown Portland office overlooked the Willamette River, and the late afternoon sun streaming through her windows created an almost ethereal quality to their conversation about custody law and parental rights. Foster to adopt cases involving competing family claims are among the most complex in family court, Margaret explained, reviewing the documents Marcus had brought. Your strongest argument will be demonstrating that disrupting the children's current placement would cause them significant psychological harm. You'll need expert testimony, documentation of their adjustment and progress, and evidence that staying with you serves their best interests better than moving to Ohio. Marcus listened carefully, taking notes on everything from court procedures to estimated timelines. The legal process could take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, depending on how aggressively the Pembertons pursued their claim and whether Dorothy's condition changed in ways that affected the case. "I have to ask," Margaret continued, leaning forward with the kind of direct eye contact that suggested she was about to address something important. "Are you prepared for the financial and emotional cost of this fight? Custody battles can be brutal, and there's no guarantee of the outcome you want." Marcus thought about Emma's fierce declaration that he was already family, about Ethan's quiet trust as he fell asleep holding Marcus's hand, about the way both children had begun to flourish in the stability he'd tried to provide. The answer came without hesitation. Yes, he said simply. These children have already lost enough. I won't let them lose their home too without a fight. Margaret nodded approvingly. Then we'll start with filing a petition for adoption and requesting that the court delay any placement decisions until we can present our case. I'll also want to bring in Dr. Amanda Reeves. She's a child psychologist who specializes in trauma and attachment. Her evaluation and testimony could be crucial. The next few weeks blurred together in a whirlwind of legal preparations, psychological evaluations, and the delicate task of maintaining normal routines for Emma and Ethan while their future hung in uncertainty. Marcus found himself documenting everything. Bedtime conversations, homework sessions, small victories and setbacks, building a paper trail that might help convince a judge that these children belonged with him. Dr. Reeves was a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of calm presence that immediately put children at ease. She spent several sessions with Emma and Ethan, both individually and together, using play therapy techniques and gentle conversation to assess their emotional state and attachment patterns. They've formed remarkably strong bonds with you in a relatively short time, she told Marcus after completing her evaluation. Emma, in particular, shows classic signs of a child who has found a secure base after experiencing significant disruption. Ethan's anxiety levels have decreased substantially since his initial placement, and both children demonstrate clear preferences for maintaining their current living situation. The psychological evaluation would be powerful evidence in court, but Marcus knew the Pembertons weren't sitting idle either. They had extended their stay in Portland, visiting Emma and Ethan twice more under Sarah Martinez's supervision. Each visit left the children more anxious and withdrawn, despite the Pembertons' genuine efforts to connect with them. During their third visit, Linda brought photo albums showing their extended family, hoping to help Emma and Ethan understand the network of relatives waiting to welcome them to Ohio. The children looked politely at pictures of cousins and second cousins, of family reunions and holiday gatherings, but their responses remained dutiful rather than enthusiastic. "This is your cousin Jessica," Linda explained, pointing to a photo of a girl about Emma's age. "She's so excited to have a sister figure. She's already planned all sorts of activities you two could do together." Emma nodded politely, but later confided to Marcus that she didn't want a sister figure. She wanted to stay with Ethan and the life they were building in Portland. The assumption that she could be plugged into someone else's family dynamic felt threatening rather than welcoming. The situation grew more complicated when Richard approached Marcus directly after one of their supervised visits. They stood in the parking lot of the Child Services building, two men who both genuinely wanted what was best for the children but had very different ideas about what that meant. "I want you to know that Linda and I don't see you as the enemy," Richard began, his tone carefully measured. "You've obviously done a good job caring for Emma and Ethan during a difficult time, but they need more than temporary stability. They need a permanent family with roots and history." Marcus studied Richard's face, seeing sincerity mixed with the kind of certainty that came from never having had his fundamental assumptions challenged. "They already have roots," Marcus replied quietly. "Here, in Portland, with Dorothy, with the life they've been building. Why is it better to transplant them to Ohio just because you share DNA? Because family matters," Richard said, his voice gaining conviction. "Because they deserve to grow up knowing where they come from, surrounded by people who share their history and understand their heritage. You're a single man with no experience raising children. We're an established family with resources and support systems." The conversation was interrupted by Emma and Ethan emerging from the building with Sarah, but Richard's words echoed in Marcus's mind for days afterward. On paper, the man's arguments made sense. The Pembertons could offer financial security, a two-parent household, extended family connections, and cultural continuity that Marcus couldn't match. But those advantages felt abstract compared to the concrete reality of daily life with Emma and Ethan. Marcus had learned to read Emma's moods by the way she arranged her breakfast, to interpret Ethan's needs from his body language during homework time. He knew that Emma processed stress by organizing things, and that Ethan needed physical activity when he felt overwhelmed. He understood their grief patterns, their sleep cycles, their individual ways of seeking comfort and reassurance. The breakthrough in Dorothy's condition came on a Tuesday morning that had started like any other. Marcus was reviewing legal documents while Emma and Ethan got ready for school when his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Dr. Hendrick's voice was cautiously optimistic as she delivered news that would change everything. "Dorothy opened her eyes this morning," she said. "She's conscious and responding to basic commands. It's too early to know the extent of her recovery, but this is far more progress than we expected to see." Marcus's first emotion was pure joy. For Emma and Ethan, followed quickly by a complex mix of hope and fear about what Dorothy's recovery might mean for their custody case. He waited until after school to share the news, wanting to be able to give the children his full attention when he told them about their grandmother's improvement. Their reaction was everything he could have hoped for. Tears of relief, excited, questions about when they could see her, immediate plans to bring her drawings and stories about everything she had missed. But underneath their joy, Marcus sensed the same uncertainty he felt about how this development might affect their living situation. The visit to Dorothy's bedside that afternoon was profoundly emotional. She was weak and confused, struggling to remember recent events, but her face lit up with unmistakable love when she saw Emma and Ethan. Her voice was hoarse from the breathing tube, but her words were clear enough. "My babies," she whispered, reaching out with trembling hands to touch their faces. "I was so worried about you." Emma and Ethan spent an hour telling Dorothy everything that had happened during her unconsciousness, their new school, their life. With Marcus, their daily routines, their fears about the Pembertons. Dorothy listened with growing alertness, asking questions that showed her cognitive abilities were largely intact despite her physical limitations. When Marcus stepped into the room, Dorothy's eyes focused on him with sharp intelligence. "You're the man who's been taking care of my grandchildren," she said, "and it wasn't a question." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, suddenly feeling like he was being evaluated by someone whose opinion mattered more than any judge's. Dorothy studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "Emma says you sleep in their room when they have nightmares. Ethan says you're teaching him about computers. They both say you make terrible pancakes, but you're learning to do better." Marcus smiled despite the gravity of the situation. "They're excellent teachers. Come closer," Dorothy requested, and when Marcus approached her bedside, she reached out to take his hand with surprising strength. "Thank you for loving them," she said simply. "I can see it in their faces. They feel safe with you." Over the following days, Dorothy's recovery progressed rapidly enough to surprise her medical team. The physical therapists were cautiously optimistic about her potential for regaining basic mobility, though she would need extensive rehabilitation and ongoing care. More importantly for the custody case, she was mentally sharp enough to make legal decisions about her grandchildren's future. The conversation with Dorothy about permanent guardianship took place in her hospital room, with Sarah Martinez present as a witness. Emma and Ethan sat on either side of their grandmother's bed, while Marcus stood near the window, trying to give the family space to discuss their options without his presence influencing the decision. "The doctors say I'll need months of rehabilitation," Dorothy began, her voice stronger than it had been since her awakening. Even if I recover enough to live independently, I won't be able to provide the kind of active care you two need. I'm too old, and this stroke has reminded me that I'm not as strong as I used to be. Emma's face crumpled with the disappointment Marcus had been dreading. But we want to stay with you, Grandma Dot. We can help take care of you. Dorothy reached out to stroke Emma's hair with gentle fingers. Sweet girl, you've already taken care of me more than any child should have to. You and Ethan deserve to have someone taking care of you, not the other way around. The room fell silent as Dorothy gathered her thoughts, clearly weighing a decision that would affect everyone's future. When she spoke again, her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent weeks thinking about what was truly best for the children she loved. Marcus, she said, turning to face him directly, these children have told me about your life, together. How you've learned their routines, how you've helped them with their grief, how you've made them feel secure and loved. They've described a home where they feel they belong. Marcus felt his heart racing as he realized where this conversation was heading. Dorothy continued, the Pembertons seem like good people, and I appreciate that they want to help. But family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up every day, about putting children's needs before your own convenience, about loving them not just as they are, but as they're becoming. She paused to look at Emma and Ethan, both of whom were watching her with intense concentration. If you're willing, Dorothy said to Marcus, I'd like to designate you as their legal guardian. I want Emma and Ethan to stay in the home where they've already begun to heal, with the person who's already proven he can love them the way they deserve to be loved. Dorothy's declaration hung in the hospital room like a prayer answered. Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief and gratitude, while Emma and Ethan looked between their grandmother and the man who had become their anchor with expressions of pure joy, mixed with disbelief that their wishes might actually come true. Are you sure, Grandma Dot? Emma asked, her voice small but hopeful. You really think we should stay with Marcus? Dorothy smiled with more energy than Marcus had seen since her awakening. Sweet girl, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Marcus has proven he's not just taking care of you. He's building a family with you. That's not something you find every day. Sarah Martinez documented Dorothy's decision with careful attention to legal protocol, ensuring that the grandmother's wishes would carry proper weight in any custody proceedings. But even as relief flooded through Marcus, he knew the battle wasn't over. The Pembertons still had legal standing as blood relatives, and Dorothy's designation as guardian didn't automatically override their potential claims. The phone call to Margaret Chen that evening was both celebratory and strategic. Dorothy's endorsement was powerful evidence, but they needed to move quickly to formalize the guardianship before the Pembertons could mount a more aggressive legal challenge. We'll file the paperwork first thing tomorrow morning, Margaret assured him. Dorothy's mental competency evaluation shows she's fully capable of making this decision, and her reasoning is sound. Combined with Dr. Reeves's psychological assessment and the children's clear preferences, we have a strong case. That night, for the first time since the custody crisis had begun, Emma and Ethan slept peacefully without nightmares or anxiety attacks. Marcus found himself lying awake, not from worry, but from the strange sensation of hope taking root in places where fear had lived for weeks. The Pembertons' reaction to Dorothy's decision was swift and, unfortunately, predictable. Richard called Sarah Martinez the next morning, his voice tight with frustration and disappointment. We're not giving up, he told Sarah, though his tone carried more hurt than anger. Those children are family, and we believe they belong with us regardless of what Dorothy thinks in her current state. We're going to contest this decision. Sarah relayed the conversation to Marcus with a mixture of sympathy and professional concern. They're entitled to their day in court, she explained. But Dorothy's testimony will be compelling, especially combined with everything else we've documented about the children's adjustment and preferences. The legal proceedings moved with surprising speed, partly due to Margaret Chen's efficiency and partly because Judge Patricia Williamson had a reputation for prioritizing children's welfare over procedural delays. The custody hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, giving both sides time to prepare their arguments. Marcus spent those weeks walking a careful line between normal family routines and the extraordinary circumstances of preparing for a court battle. Emma and Ethan knew about the hearing, but he tried to shield them from the stress and uncertainty as much as possible. They continued their daily hospital visits with Dorothy, whose recovery progressed steadily enough that she was moved from ICU to a regular room. Dorothy used her recovery time productively, working with a social worker to create a detailed statement about her decision-making process and her observations of Marcus's relationship with the children. She also spent hours talking with Emma and Ethan about their feelings, ensuring they understood that whatever happened in court, they were loved and valued by everyone involved in the decision. "I want you both to know," Dorothy told them during one of their afternoon visits, "that the Pembertons aren't bad people. They genuinely want what's best for you. They just have different ideas about what that means. But I've lived long enough to know the difference between good intentions and genuine understanding." Dr. Reeves conducted follow-up evaluations with both children, documenting their continued emotional stability and their clear articulation of their preferences. Emma, in particular, had developed a sophisticated understanding of the situation that impressed the child psychologist. "I know the Ohio people are nice," Emma told Dr. Reeves during one session, "but they don't know that Ethan has bad dreams when it storms, or that I need to check on him 3 times before I can fall asleep. They don't know that Marcus lets us help make dinner, even when we make mistakes, or that he reads the same book over and over because it's Ethan's favorite even, though he probably thinks it's boring." These detailed observations of daily life became crucial evidence in their case, demonstrating that the children's attachment to Marcus was based on real understanding and genuine care rather than mere convenience or familiarity. The week before the hearing, Marcus received an unexpected phone call from Linda Pemberton. Her voice was strained but cordial as she asked if they could meet privately to discuss the situation. They arranged to have coffee at a neutral location downtown, both of them approaching the conversation with caution and genuine concern for Emma and Ethan's welfare. Linda looked tired and conflicted as she sat across from Marcus in the busy cafe, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup as if seeking warmth and comfort. "Richard thinks I'm betraying our family by having this conversation," she began, "but I needed to talk to you directly, away from lawyers and social workers and all the official procedures." Marcus waited, sensing that Linda had something important to say, but needed time to find the right words. "We came to Portland with such clear intentions," she continued. "We saw 2 orphaned children who needed a stable family, and we were certain we could provide that. We have experience raising kids, financial security, a whole network of relatives ready to welcome Emma and Ethan with open arms." She paused, staring into her coffee as if the answers to complicated questions might be floating there. "But watching them with you over these past weeks, seeing how they respond to your presence, how they talk about their life in your home." Linda looked up to meet Marcus's eyes directly. "They're not just being cared for, they're thriving. And that's not something I can dismiss just because it doesn't match what I thought was best for them." Marcus felt a surge of respect for Linda's honesty and emotional maturity. "You and Richard would give them a wonderful life," he said sincerely. "I've never doubted that you love them and want what's best for them." Linda smiled sadly. "But love isn't always enough if it's not the right kind of love for the specific people involved. Emma and Ethan don't need to be rescued. They need to be allowed to continue growing in the environment where they've already started to heal. The conversation continued for another hour, with Linda sharing her own childhood experiences of being moved between relatives after her parents' divorce, and Marcus talking about his grief journey and how the children had helped him rediscover purpose and joy in unexpected ways. When they parted, Linda didn't make any promises about changing her husband's mind or withdrawing their custody petition, but Marcus sensed that something fundamental had shifted in her perspective, and he allowed himself to hope that their conversation might influence the Pembertons' approach to the hearing. The day of the custody hearing dawned grey and drizzly, typical Portland weather that matched Marcus's nervous energy. Emma and Ethan were not required to appear in court, but they knew the significance of the day and had insisted on wearing their best clothes to school, as if formal attire might somehow influence the outcome of decisions being made on their behalf. Judge Williamson's courtroom was smaller and less intimidating than Marcus had expected, but the weight of the proceedings felt enormous as he sat beside Margaret Chen, reviewing their strategy one final time. The Pembertons sat across the aisle with their attorney, Richard looking determined and Linda appearing more conflicted than confident. Dorothy had been cleared by her doctors to attend the hearing, arriving in a wheelchair with a hospital aide, but insisting on dressing in her best suit for the occasion. Her presence added gravity to the proceedings and served as a powerful reminder that this case was about real people with deep emotional connections, not just legal abstractions. The hearing began with each side presenting their basic arguments. The Pembertons' attorney emphasized family connections, financial stability, and the advantages of a two-parent household with extended family support. Margaret Chen countered with evidence of the children's successful adjustment, their psychological evaluations, and Dorothy's informed decision as their current legal guardian. Dorothy's testimony was the emotional centerpiece of the hearing. Despite her physical frailty, her voice was strong and clear as she explained her reasoning to Judge Williamson. "Your Honor, I've had the privilege of raising these children for 2 years, and I've watched them navigate grief and loss with remarkable resilience," Dorothy began. "But I've also seen them struggle with change and uncertainty. When they were placed with Marcus Thompson, I watched them transform from children who were simply surviving to children who were beginning to thrive again." She paused to look directly at the Pembertons before continuing. "Richard and Linda are good people who could provide material advantages that I cannot. But Emma and Ethan don't need advantages. They need consistency, understanding, and the security of knowing that the person caring for them has already proven his commitment to their well-being." Dr. Reeves testified about her psychological evaluations, explaining the concept of attachment theory and how disrupting established bonds could cause significant trauma for children who had already experienced multiple losses. "These children have formed secure attachments with Mr. Thompson," she explained to the judge. "Moving them now would require them to start the attachment process over again, potentially causing regression in their emotional development and sense of security." The most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Linda Pemberton asked to address the court directly, speaking against her husband's wishes and their attorney's legal strategy. "Your Honor, my husband and I came here believing we knew what was best for Emma and Ethan," she said, her voice steady despite the obvious difficulty of her words. "We believed that family meant blood and that love meant providing opportunities and advantages." She glanced at Richard, whose face showed a mixture of hurt and confusion at her public change of position. "But watching these children over the past month, I've learned that family is more complicated than genetics, and that love sometimes means accepting when someone else can provide what children need better than you can. Emma and Ethan have already found their family with Mr. Thompson, with their grandmother, in the life they've built in Portland. Our role should be to support that family, not to disrupt it." The courtroom fell silent as Linda sat down, her testimony having effectively undermined her own family's custody petition. Richard stared at his wife in shock, while their attorneys struggled to recover from this unexpected development. Judge Williamson called a brief recess to review all the evidence and testimony before rendering her decision. Marcus spent the break in the hallway with Margaret Chen, trying to process everything that had happened and prepare himself for whatever came next. When they reconvened, Judge Williamson's expression was thoughtful but decisive as she addressed the courtroom. This case represents the kind of complex family situation that requires looking beyond legal technicalities to focus on what truly serves the best interests of the children involved, she began. While blood relationships carry legal significance, they must be weighed against established bonds, demonstrated care, and the children's own expressed preferences. Marcus felt his heart pounding as the judge continued her analysis, reviewing each piece of evidence and testimony that had been presented. The moment of decision felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to discover whether he would fall or fly. Judge Williamson's voice filled the silent courtroom as she delivered her decision with the measured authority of someone who understood the life-altering weight of her words. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence, this court finds that the best interests of Emma and Ethan Parker are served by maintaining their current placement with Marcus Thompson, with the full support and endorsement of their current guardian, Dorothy Parker. Mr. Thompson's petition for adoption is hereby approved, pending completion of standard background checks and home studies. The gavel came down with a sound that seemed to echo through Marcus's entire being. Around him, the courtroom erupted in quiet celebration. Dorothy's tearful smile, Margaret Chen's satisfied nod, Sarah Martinez's visible relief. Across the aisle, Richard Pemberton sat in stunned silence, while Linda reached over to squeeze his hand, offering comfort despite her own role in their legal defeat. Marcus felt as though he might collapse from the sheer, overwhelming nature of the moment. After months of uncertainty and weeks of legal battle, Emma and Ethan were truly going to be his children. Not temporarily, not conditionally, but permanently and legally. A family chosen by circumstance, but bound together by something much deeper than law or biology. The drive to Emma and Ethan's school to deliver the news felt surreal, as if Marcus were floating through a dream that might dissolve if he focused too hard on the details. Margaret Chen had handled the immediate paperwork, while Marcus rushed to share the outcome with the children who had been waiting anxiously for news that would determine their entire future. He found them in the school office, having been excused from their afternoon classes to wait for his arrival. Emma sat rigid with nervous energy, while Ethan paced in small circles, both of them looking up with identical expressions of desperate hope when Marcus walked through the door. "We won," Marcus said simply, and watched as their faces transformed. From anxiety to pure joy, Emma launched herself into his arms with uncharacteristic abandon, while Ethan wrapped himself around Marcus's legs, both children crying tears of relief and happiness. The school secretary dabbed at her own eyes as she watched the reunion, clearly moved by the intensity of their emotional response. "Does this mean we're really staying?" Ethan asked, his voice muffled against Marcus's shirt. "Forever and for real?" "Forever and for real," Marcus confirmed, his own voice thick with emotion. "You're stuck with me now, whether you like it or not." "We like it," Emma declared fiercely, her arms still locked around his neck. "We like it so much." The celebration at Dorothy's bedside that evening was bittersweet in the most beautiful way. Dorothy had been discharged to a rehabilitation facility that afternoon, her recovery progressing well enough that she was expected to regain most of her independence within a few months. But more importantly, she was lucid and alert enough to fully appreciate the significance of the day's events. "I knew that judge was smart the moment she walked into that courtroom," Dorothy said, holding both children's hands while Marcus sat beside her bed. "She understood what really matters in families, not where people come from, but how they choose to love each other." Emma and Ethan took turns telling their grandmother about their day at school, how their teachers had been excited to hear the news, how their classmates had congratulated them on getting to stay in Portland. Their chatter was animated and hopeful in ways Marcus hadn't heard since before Dorothy's stroke, as if the legal resolution had finally given them permission to believe in their future again. Over the following weeks, the process of finalizing the adoption proceeded smoothly. The required home studies were mere formalities given Marcus's existing foster certification and the court's decision, but each completed form and signed document felt like another layer of security being added. To their family foundation, the Pembertons returned to Ohio with grace and dignity that Marcus deeply respected. Richard had been disappointed by the outcome, but he ultimately accepted his wife's reasoning and the court's decision. Linda sent a card to Emma and Ethan, expressing her hope that they would stay in touch and promising that they would always have family in Ohio if they ever wanted to visit or needed additional support. More importantly, Dorothy's recovery continued to exceed medical expectations. The physical therapy was exhausting and sometimes frustrating, but her determination to regain her independence was fueled by her desire to be an active grandmother to Emma and Ethan in their new life with Marcus. She would never again be their primary caregiver, but she could be something equally valuable, a bridge between their past and their future, a source of continuity and wisdom as they grew up. The house that had felt too empty for one person gradually transformed into a space that perfectly accommodated their family of 3. Emma claimed the bedroom with the better morning light for reading, while Ethan chose the room closer to Marcus's so he could easily find comfort during occasional nightmares. They painted walls together, hung artwork created by small hands, and filled closets with clothes and toys and books that belonged to children who were planning to stay. Marcus's work life adapted around his new role as a single father with surprising ease. His company had always been flexible about remote work, and his colleagues were supportive of his transition into parenthood. Emma and Ethan learned to entertain themselves quietly during his video conferences, and he discovered that some of his most creative programming solutions came during breaks spent helping with homework or listening to their stories about school. The most profound changes were emotional rather than logistical. Marcus found himself laughing more than he had since Rebecca's illness, rediscovering joy in simple pleasures like Saturday morning pancakes and bedtime stories. Emma and Ethan, meanwhile, began to exhibit the kind of carefree behavior that was appropriate for their age. Silly jokes, petty sibling squabbles, excitement about upcoming holidays and school events. 6 months after the adoption was finalized, Marcus sat in his backyard watching Emma and Ethan play with the neighbor's cat that had essentially adopted their family along with everyone else. The Oregon summer evening was perfect, warm but not hot, with the kind of golden light that made everything look like a painting. Dorothy joined them for dinner that evening, having progressed to the point where she could drive short distances and manage stairs with minimal assistance. She brought homemade cookies and stories about her physical therapy adventures, her presence adding the final piece to their family puzzle. "You know," Dorothy said as they cleaned up after dinner, "I used to worry that losing their parents so young would define Emma and Ethan's entire lives. I was afraid they would always be the children who had experienced too much loss, too much uncertainty." Marcus looked through the kitchen window at the children, who were now teaching the neighbors. "Got to play fetch with varying degrees of success. But watching them with you," Dorothy continued, "I realize that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that choose each other. You 3 have created something together that's stronger than what any of you lost." Later that night, After Dorothy had gone home and the children were finally settled in their beds, Marcus found himself thinking about the path that had led them all to this moment. A year ago, he had been a man paralyzed by grief, going through the motions of living without really engaging with life. The phone call from Sarah Martinez had forced him out of that liminal space, challenging him to become someone he'd never imagined being. Emma appeared in his doorway, interrupting his reflections with the particular kind of serious expression that meant she had something important to discuss. "Marcus," she said, using the tentative tone that still occasionally surfaced, when she wanted to make sure she wasn't overstepping boundaries. "What's up, sweetheart? Can I ask you something kind of weird?" Marcus patted the couch beside him, inviting her to sit down for whatever conversation was coming. "You can ask me anything." Emma curled up against his side, taking a moment to organize her thoughts before speaking. "Do you think Rebecca would have liked us?" The question hit Marcus with unexpected force, partly because Emma so rarely mentioned his late wife, and partly because he realized he'd been wondering the same thing himself. "I think she would have loved you both completely," he said honestly. "Rebecca always believed that families could be created in lots of different ways, and she would have been amazed by how brave and smart and kind you and Ethan are." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "I wish we could have met her," she said finally. "I think we would have been good friends." "I think so too," Marcus agreed, feeling a sense of peace about Rebecca's memory that had eluded him for months. "And I think she would be really happy about how we've all taken care of each other." As Emma headed back to bed, Marcus realized that his grief for Rebecca hadn't disappeared. It had transformed into something more complex and ultimately more sustainable. The love he'd shared with her had prepared him to love Emma and Ethan, and their presence in his life had helped him understand that honoring Rebecca's memory didn't require staying frozen in the past. The story could have ended there, with a family that had found each other through tragedy and built something beautiful from the pieces of their individual losses. But life, as Marcus was learning, rarely follows the neat narrative arcs of books or movies. 2 years later, Marcus stood in the same courthouse where Emma and Ethan's adoption had been finalized, this time as Ethan's proud father, watching him receive a science fair award for a robotics project they had built together. Emma, now 9, served as the family photographer, documenting Ethan's moment of triumph with the seriousness of a professional journalist. Dorothy sat in the front row, her recovery now complete enough that she had returned to her own apartment, while maintaining her role as the children's most devoted grandmother. She had become Marcus's co-parent in the truest sense, offering wisdom and support while respecting the family structure he had created with Emma and Ethan. The Pembertons had indeed remained part of their extended family, sending birthday cards and holiday gifts, occasionally video chatting with the children to maintain their connection to that branch of their family tree. Richard had eventually come to understand his wife's decision, and both of them took pride in Emma and Ethan's achievements and happiness. But perhaps the most surprising development was the letter that arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning, addressed to Marcus Thompson from the state foster care system. Inside was a request that would once again challenge his assumptions about what his family might become. "Mr. Thompson," the letter began, "we have a situation involving 3 young siblings who need emergency placement. Given your successful experience with Emma and Ethan Parker, and based on the recommendation of several social workers, we would like to discuss the possibility of expanding your family once again." Marcus read the letter twice, then called Emma and Ethan into the kitchen to share this unexpected development. Their response was immediate and unanimous. Of course, they had room for more children who needed a family. Their house was big enough. Their hearts were big enough, and they had learned from experience that the best families were often the ones that grew through choice rather than chance. As Marcus reached for the phone to call the social worker back, He smiled at the realization that his story with Emma and Ethan wasn't really an ending at all. It was a beginning. They had all learned to heal each other's hearts, and now they were ready to offer that same healing to other children who needed to discover that love and family could emerge from the most unexpected places. The phone rang twice before Sarah Martinez answered, her familiar voice carrying the same mixture of hope and urgency that had started this entire adventure years earlier. And Marcus, no longer the uncertain man who had hesitated before taking in two traumatized children, found himself saying yes before she had even finished explaining the situation. After all, he had learned something important about family. It wasn't about the number of people around your table or the complexity of your daily routines. It was about showing up every day with open hearts and patient hands, ready to build something beautiful from whatever pieces life offered you. And Marcus Thompson, father to Emma and Ethan, had become very good at building beautiful things from broken pieces. The Martinez siblings were nothing like Emma and Ethan had been when they first arrived. While Emma and Ethan had been quiet, polite children carrying their grief with determined dignity, Sofia, Diego, and little Carlos brought chaos and raw emotion that tested every parenting skill Marcus had developed over the past 3 years. Sofia, at 11, was the fierce protector of her younger brothers, but her protection came in the form of explosive anger and deep mistrust of any adult who tried to help. She had been caring for 6-year-old Diego and 4-year-old Carlos in a car for 3 days before a concerned citizen called social services, their mother having disappeared after their latest eviction with promises to return that had proven empty. Diego had stopped speaking entirely except to Carlos, communicating with his little brother through whispers and gestures that excluded everyone else. Carlos, barely out of toddlerhood, clung to Diego with desperate intensity and cried inconsolably whenever they were separated for even a few minutes. Sarah Martinez, no relation to the children despite sharing their surname, sat in Marcus's living room explaining the situation, while Emma and Ethan listened with the kind of serious attention that came from understanding what it meant to need emergency placement. "These children have been in the system before," Sarah explained, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had worked too many crisis cases in recent months. "Their mother has struggled with addiction and housing instability for years. The children have been placed with relatives twice, only to be returned to their mother when she completed treatment programs. This time, there are no relatives available or willing to help." Marcus studied the file photos of 3 small faces marked by premature wariness and defensive anger. Sophia's eyes blazed with the kind of fury that came from repeated disappointment, while Diego's expression held the blank protective numbness of a child who had learned not to hope for consistency. Carlos alone showed traces of the innocence appropriate to his age, but even his smile seemed tentative and uncertain. "What are their specific needs?" Marcus asked, already mentally preparing for the challenges ahead. "Sophia has been diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder and will need therapy to address her trauma responses. Diego's selective mutism appears to be related to witnessing domestic violence in their previous home. Carlos has some developmental delays, likely due to inconsistent care and nutrition during his early years." Emma looked up from the file photos with the kind of determined expression Marcus had learned to recognize as her problem-solving face. "They're scared," she announced, as if this explained everything important about the situation. "Yes, they are," Sarah agreed. "And they have good reason to be. These children have learned that adults make promises they don't keep, that homes aren't necessarily safe places, and that the only person you can really count on is yourself." Ethan, now 9 and remarkably insightful about family dynamics, asked the question that cut to the heart of the matter: "Do you think we can help them learn that our house is different? The question revealed how much Emma and Ethan had internalized the lessons of their own healing journey. They understood that family wasn't just about providing shelter and food. It was about creating an environment where people could risk being vulnerable enough to heal. "I think we can try," Marcus replied, looking around at his family and feeling simultaneously terrified and determined. "But it's going to be harder than anything we've done before. Are you both sure you're ready for that?" Emma and Ethan exchanged one of their wordless conversations, coming to a decision with the kind of unity that still amazed Marcus after 3 years of witnessing their sibling telepathy. "We're ready," Emma said firmly. "Besides, our house is too quiet anyway. Carlos is little. He probably needs someone to read him stories and teach him how to tie his shoes. And Diego likes to build things, just like Ethan does." Marcus marveled at how quickly Emma had absorbed details from the children's files and translated them into concrete ways their family could help. Her natural caretaking instincts had developed into genuine wisdom about what children needed to feel secure and valued. The Martinez siblings arrived on a Friday afternoon in early September, 3 small figures carrying garbage bags of belongings and expressions that ranged from hostile to terrified. Sophia walked slightly ahead of her brothers, her posture protective and challenging, ready for whatever disappointment or rejection this new placement might bring. Diego held Carlos's hand while scanning every corner of Marcus's house as if cataloguing potential escape routes. Carlos sucked his thumb and stared at everything with the wide-eyed confusion of a child who had stopped expecting explanations for why his world kept changing. "This is temporary," Sophia announced before anyone had even finished introductions. "We don't stay anywhere very long, so don't get attached or whatever." Her words were clearly meant to establish boundaries and manage expectations, but Marcus heard the underlying message: "Don't hurt us by pretending this might be permanent when we know better than to believe in permanence." "That's okay," Marcus replied calmly. "For now, this is just a safe place to sleep and eat and figure out what comes next. No pressure beyond that." Sophia's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were trying to detect the trap hidden in such a reasonable response. Children who had been disappointed repeatedly became experts at recognizing adult manipulation, and Sophia was clearly prepared for Marcus to reveal his true agenda at any moment. The first few days were exhausting in ways that Marcus hadn't anticipated. Carlos cried constantly, not the demanding cries of a spoiled child, but the heartbroken sobs of someone grieving losses he couldn't articulate. Diego shadowed his little brother obsessively, refusing to let Carlos out of his sight, even for basic activities like bathing or sleeping. Sophia maintained a running commentary of criticism about everything from the food Marcus cooked to the rules he established to the fake niceness of Emma and Ethan's attempts to welcome them. Emma and Ethan, meanwhile, navigated the chaos with remarkable maturity and patience. Emma seemed to understand instinctively that Sophia's hostility was defensive rather than malicious, responding to criticism with matter-of-fact explanations rather than hurt feelings. When Sophia complained that the bedroom she was sharing with Carlos was too bright and smelled weird, Emma simply helped her rearrange the furniture and brought sachets of lavender from Dorothy's garden to change the scent. Ethan appointed himself as Diego's silent companion, sitting beside the 6-year-old during meals and offering to share toys without expecting conversation or gratitude in return. His approach seemed to puzzle Diego, who was accustomed to adults who demanded responses and reactions rather than simply offering presence and patience. The breakthrough with Carlos came unexpectedly during his second week with the family. Marcus was working at his computer while the little boy played quietly nearby, or what passed for quietly given Carlos's tendency to provide running commentary for his toy cars in a mixture of English and Spanish. Suddenly, Carlos appeared at Marcus's elbow with a picture book, holding it out with the kind of hopeful expression that suggested he was risking disappointment by asking for attention. "Story?" Carlos asked, his voice small but clear. Marcus immediately closed his laptop and settled into the reading chair, pulling Carlos onto his lap with gentle hands. The little boy relaxed against his chest with a sigh that seemed to release weeks of held tension, and for the first time since his arrival, Carlos fell asleep peacefully without crying. Diego witnessed this interaction from the hallway, his expression unreadable but intent. Over the following days, he began positioning himself within earshot during story time, eventually accepting Marcus's invitation to join them on the chair. Diego never spoke during these sessions, but his presence felt like progress. Sophia's walls proved more difficult to penetrate. She had appointed herself as the family skeptic, questioning every kindness and rejecting every attempt at connection. When Emma offered to teach her how to braid friendship bracelets, Sophia dismissed it as baby stuff. When Ethan invited her to help with his latest robotics project, she claimed she wasn't interested in nerd things. When Marcus asked for her help planning meals for the week, she accused him of trying to manipulate her into feeling responsible for the family's needs. The crisis came during their third week together, triggered by what should have been a routine trip to the grocery store. Sophia had been unusually quiet during breakfast, which Marcus had learned was often a warning sign that she was processing difficult emotions. When he announced that they needed to go shopping for school supplies, Sophia's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "I'm not going to school here," she declared, her voice rising with panic disguised as anger. "I don't need school supplies because we're not staying. You can't make me pretend this is real when I know it's not." The meltdown that followed was spectacular and heartbreaking. Sophia screamed about being tired of new schools and new rules, and new people who pretended to care before giving up and sending them away. She threw books and kicked furniture and finally collapsed on the floor, sobbing with the kind of grief that comes from losing hope too many times. Marcus sat beside her, on the floor, not trying to comfort or quiet her, just bearing witness to pain that was too big for an 11-year-old to carry alone. Emma and Ethan instinctively gathered Diego and Carlos into the kitchen, giving Sophia space to fall apart without an audience. When the storm finally passed, Sophia lay curled on the floor, exhausted and vulnerable in ways she rarely allowed herself to be. Marcus reached out slowly, telegraphing his movements so she could pull away if she needed to, and gently stroked her hair. "It's not fair," Sophia whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "It's not fair that we never get to stay anywhere. It's not fair that Carlos doesn't remember what it's like to have a real home. It's not fair that Diego stopped talking because he's scared all the time." "You're absolutely right," Marcus agreed. "None of this is fair. You shouldn't have to take care of your little brothers by yourself. You shouldn't have to wonder where you'll be sleeping next month. You shouldn't have to protect yourself from people who are supposed to be protecting you." Sophia looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes that held a flicker of surprise. Adults usually tried to convince her that things weren't as bad as she thought, or that everything would work out in the end. Marcus was the first person to simply acknowledge that her life had been genuinely unfair. "But here's what I can promise you," Marcus continued. "For as long as you're in this house, you're safe. You don't have to take care of anyone but yourself. You can trust that there will be food in the refrigerator and clean clothes in your dresser and adults who show up when they say they will." "What if you change your mind?" Sophia asked, voicing the fear that kept her awake at night. "What if we're too much trouble? What if you decide you only want Emma and Ethan?" Marcus thought carefully before answering, knowing that his response would either build trust or confirm Sophia's worst expectations about adult reliability. "Sophia, I'm not going to lie to you and say that this is easy or that I know exactly what I'm doing," he said honestly. "Taking care of 5 children is harder than I expected, and some days I feel completely overwhelmed. But being overwhelmed isn't the same as giving up. When Emma and Ethan first came to live with me, I was scared and confused too. I made mistakes and had to learn as I went, but I never stopped trying, and I never will stop trying. Not for them, and not for you and Diego and Carlos. Something shifted in Sophia's expression, a subtle relaxation that suggested his words had found their target. She didn't transform overnight into a trusting, easygoing child. That kind of healing took months, not moments. But she stopped actively sabotaging every attempt at connection and began allowing small gestures of care to reach her. The integration of 5 children into one household required logistics that Marcus had never considered. Bedrooms had to be reconfigured, schedules had to be coordinated, and every family tradition had to be examined and adapted to include 3 more personalities and sets of needs. Emma and Ethan rose to the challenge with the kind of flexibility that came from their own experience of joining an established family. They helped Diego and Carlos learn the house rules, showed Sophia where everything was located, and created space for the newcomers in their established routines without making it feel like charity or obligation. Dorothy's role became even more crucial as the family expanded. Her experience raising children and her perspective as someone who had weathered multiple family crises made her an invaluable source of wisdom and practical support. She began spending more time at the house, helping with homework supervision and bedtime routines, serving as an additional adult presence when Marcus felt outnumbered by the complexity of 5 different personalities and needs. "You know," Dorothy observed one evening as she helped Marcus clean up after a dinner that had involved 3 separate conversations, 2 minor arguments, and 1 spectacular milk spill, "I never thought I'd see the day when this house felt too small for all the love living in it." Marcus paused in his dishwashing to look around at the controlled chaos that had become their family life. Carlos was building elaborate train tracks across the living room floor while providing detailed narration for his locomotive adventures. Diego was teaching Ethan a card game that involved complex rules and frequent disputes about cheating. Emma and Sophia were deep in conversation about a book they were both reading, their heads bent together over the pages in a way that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. The noise level was considerable, the mess was constant, and Marcus frequently fell into bed exhausted from the mental and emotional energy required to meet 5 different sets of needs every single day. But Dorothy was right. The house was full of love in ways that felt miraculous rather than overwhelming. 6 months after the Martinez siblings' arrival, Marcus found himself standing in the same courthouse where Emma and Ethan's adoption had been finalized, this time listening to a different judge discuss the possibility of permanent placement for Sophia, Diego, and Carlos. Their mother had not responded to any attempts at contact, and her parental rights were being terminated to allow for adoption proceedings. Unlike the contentious battle over Emma and Ethan, there were no competing claims for the Martinez children. No relatives had stepped forward. No other families had expressed interest in taking all 3 siblings together. Marcus's petition to adopt them was supported by glowing reports from their teachers, their therapists, and Sarah Martinez, who had witnessed the transformation in all 3 children over the past months. But the most compelling testimony came from Sophia herself, who had asked to speak directly to the judge about her family's future. At 11, she was old enough to have her preferences given serious consideration, and her words carried the weight of someone who understood the gravity of the decision being made. "Your Honor," Sophia began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "I know that families are supposed to be about blood and genetics and stuff like that. But I've learned that the most important thing about family is showing up every day and meaning it when you say you care about someone." She paused to look back at Marcus, Emma, and Ethan sitting in the front row of the courtroom, their faces reflecting pride and encouragement. Marcus, Emma, and Ethan didn't have to take us in, Sophia continued. They could have said we were too much trouble or too complicated. But they didn't. They learned our names and our favorite foods and the things that make us scared, and they never made us feel like we were too much. That's what family is supposed to do. They're supposed to see you completely and love you anyway. The judge's decision was swift and unanimous. The adoption was approved, making Marcus the legal father of 5 children who had found each other through circumstances that had begun with loss but had grown into something beautiful and unbreakable. 5 years had passed since the Martinez adoption, and the Thompson household had evolved into something that defied every conventional definition of family Marcus had grown up understanding. At 16, Emma had become a force of nature, student body president, debate team captain, and the unofficial family coordinator who somehow managed to keep track of everyone's schedules, needs, and emotional states with the precision of a military strategist. Ethan, now 14, had inherited his adoptive father's love for technology, but channeled it into creative projects that amazed his teachers and occasionally worried his family. His latest invention was a communication device designed specifically for Diego, who had never fully overcome his selective mutism, but had found ways to express himself through technology that words couldn't accommodate. Sophia, at 16, had transformed from the angry, defensive child who had arrived 5 years earlier into a passionate advocate for foster children and sibling groups. She volunteered at the local Children's Services office, mentoring newly placed children and helping them navigate the overwhelming complexity of the system that had once failed her so completely. Diego, 11, remained quiet but had developed into an artist whose drawings and sculptures captured emotions and experiences that his voice still struggled to convey. His selective mutism had evolved into a deliberate choice to communicate through visual art, and his work had begun attracting attention from local galleries interested in showcasing young talent. Carlos, now 9, was the family comedian whose infectious laughter and boundless energy kept everyone's spirits high during difficult times. He had overcome his early developmental delays and had grown into a confident, articulate child who served as the bridge between his older siblings and the newer additions to their ever-expanding family. Because, of course, the family had continued to grow. Over the past 5 years, Marcus had become the go-to placement for children who needed specialized care or sibling groups that other families couldn't accommodate. The house had been renovated twice to add bedrooms and bathrooms, transforming from a modest family home into something resembling a small dormitory that somehow still managed to feel warm and personal. The newest additions were twins Malik and Aisha Johnson, 8-year-old siblings who had been removed from their home after their grandmother, their primary caregiver, had been hospitalized with dementia. Unlike the children who had come before them, Malik and Aisha weren't traumatized by abuse or neglect. They were simply children whose family circumstances had changed in ways that required temporary outside help. But their addition had created new challenges that tested Marcus's parenting skills in unexpected ways. Malik was academically gifted but socially anxious, preferring books and solitary activities to the chaotic energy that characterized the Thompson household. Aisha was outgoing and athletic, thriving in group activities, but struggling with the academic expectations that came easily to her twin brother. "It's like they're from a completely different planet," Sophia confided to Marcus one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. "They're not scared or angry or suspicious. They're just normal kids who happen to need a place to stay. I don't know how to help them because they don't need the kind of help I needed." Sophia's observation highlighted something important about their family's evolution. Emma, Ethan, Sophia, Diego, and Carlos had all bonded through shared experiences of trauma and loss. Their relationships were built on mutual understanding of what it meant to survive difficult circumstances and find healing through stable relationships. Malik and Aisha didn't share that background, which made their integration more complex in unexpected ways. The solution came from an unlikely source. Dorothy, now in her mid-80s but still sharp and actively involved in the family's daily life, suggested that the twins might benefit from connecting with children outside the household who shared their interests and academic abilities. "Not every child who comes to this family needs to be fixed," Dorothy observed during one of their regular family meetings. "Sometimes they just need to be supported while they figure out where they belong in the world. Malik and Aisha might be here to teach the rest of you something about what normal childhood looks like." Her insight proved prescient. As Malik began participating in the robotics club that Ethan had started at school, his confidence grew and his anxiety decreased. Aisha joined the community soccer league that Carlos played in, finding her place as both an athlete and a leader who helped younger players develop their skills. More importantly, their presence helped the older Thompson children understand that family could accommodate different types of needs and personalities. Not every child required intensive healing from trauma. Some just needed stability and support while they navigated normal developmental challenges. The real test of the family's resilience came during Marcus's own health crisis. He had been ignoring persistent headaches and fatigue for months, attributing them to the stress of managing a household with 7 children. When he finally collapsed at work and was rushed to the hospital, the diagnosis was a brain tumor that required immediate surgery and extensive treatment. The news hit the family like an earthquake. Marcus had been their anchor, their constant source of stability and reassurance. The possibility of losing him forced everyone to confront fears they hadn't realized they were carrying about the fragility of the security they had built together. Emma stepped up immediately, coordinating with Dorothy to manage household logistics while Marcus underwent surgery and began recovery. Sophia took charge of emotional support for the younger children, drawing on her own experience with uncertainty and fear to help them process their anxiety. Ethan threw himself into research, learning everything he could about Marcus's condition and treatment options. Diego and Carlos, despite their own fears, became fierce protectors of family morale, creating art projects and organizing game nights designed to keep everyone's spirits up during the long weeks of Marcus's recovery. Even Malik and Aisha, who had been with the family for less than a year, stepped up to help with household chores and childcare responsibilities. The surgery was successful, but Marcus's recovery was slow and sometimes discouraging. The man who had been accustomed to managing everyone else's needs found himself dependent on others for basic daily activities. The role reversal was humbling and occasionally frustrating, but it also revealed the depth of love and commitment that had grown within their chosen family. "You know what's weird?" Emma said one evening as she helped Marcus with his physical therapy exercises. "I used to be terrified that something would happen to you because I thought that would mean we'd all get split up again. But watching everyone take care of each other these past few months, I realize we're not just your children, we're each other's family too." Her observation captured something profound about how their family had evolved. Marcus had started as the central figure around which everyone else orbited, but over time they had become a constellation of interconnected relationships that could support each other even when he wasn't able to be their primary source of stability. The recovery period also brought unexpected insights about each child's individual growth and capabilities. Sophia's natural leadership abilities flourished as she took on more responsibility for family coordination. Ethan's problem-solving skills extended beyond technology into practical household management. Diego's quiet observations translated into an uncanny ability to anticipate what people needed before they asked for help. Carlos revealed a gift for mediating conflicts between siblings, using humor and empathy to diffuse tensions that might otherwise have escalated into serious arguments. Malik's analytical mind proved invaluable for organizing schedules and managing the complex logistics of 7 children's different activities and commitments. Aisha's athletic abilities extended into a natural talent for motivating others to stay active and healthy during a stressful time. Most surprisingly, Dorothy's role evolved from helpful grandmother figure to irreplaceable family cornerstone. Her experience managing large households during her own child-rearing years, combined with her deep understanding of each child's individual needs and history, made her the perfect bridge between Marcus's recovery needs and the children's ongoing care requirements. "I never expected to be raising children again at my age," Dorothy admitted to Marcus during one of his follow-up appointments. "But these kids have given me purpose and energy I didn't know I still had. Taking care of all of you has been taking care of me too." 6 months after his surgery, Marcus was cleared to return to full activity, but the family dynamic had permanently shifted. The children had learned they could take care of each other and their father, not just receive care from him. He had learned to accept help and vulnerability, not just provide strength and stability. The changes were evident in their daily routines and decision-making processes. Family meetings became genuine discussions where everyone's input was valued and considered. Household responsibilities were distributed based on interest and ability rather than age or seniority. Children were encouraged to pursue their individual passions while maintaining their commitment to family obligations. The most significant change was in how they approached new placements. When Sarah Martinez called about a teenage mother and her infant daughter who needed emergency housing, the entire family participated in the discussion about whether they had the resources and capabilities to help. "Jasmine is 17 and her baby Lily is 6 months old," Sarah explained during a family meeting. "She aged out of foster care last year and has been living in her car since her boyfriend left when he found out about the pregnancy. She's not looking for adoption or permanent placement. She just needs a stable place to live while she finishes high school and figures out how to support herself and her daughter." The situation was different from any previous placement they had considered. Jasmine wasn't a child who needed parenting, but a young adult who needed mentorship and practical support. Baby Lily would require care and attention, but wouldn't be staying permanently. Emma was immediately interested in the mentorship possibilities, seeing an opportunity to help someone navigate the transition to independence that she would face herself in a few years. Sophia was drawn to the advocacy aspects, understanding from her volunteer work how difficult it was for young people aging out of foster care to find stable housing and support. Ethan and Diego were fascinated by the idea of having a baby in the house, while Carlos was excited about the possibility of being a big brother figure to someone even younger than himself. Malik and Aisha were supportive, but also curious about how the addition of a teenage mother and infant would affect the family dynamics they were still learning to navigate. Marcus found himself thinking about how much his own perspective had changed over the years. The man who had once hesitated to take in 2 elementary school-aged children was now confidently discussing the logistics of supporting a teenage mother and her infant daughter. "I think we should do it," he said finally. "Not because it will be easy, but because we have something to offer that Jasmine and Lily need, and because helping them will probably teach us things we need to learn too." The family's unanimous agreement felt like a milestone, not just in their willingness to expand again, but in their recognition that they had become the kind of family that could adapt to almost any configuration of need and support. Dorothy smiled as she watched the discussion unfold, remembering the scared, grieving man who had first agreed to take in Emma and Ethan years earlier. That man had been motivated by loneliness and a vague sense of obligation. The man sitting at the head of this table was motivated by joy and a clear understanding of what family could become when people committed to loving each other through every kind of challenge and change. "Well then," Dorothy said, standing up, to signal the end of their meeting, "I guess we'd better start baby-proofing the house and figuring out where to put a crib. Jasmine and Lily are going to need us to be ready when they get here." As the children scattered to begin preparations for their newest family members, Marcus remained at the table for a moment, marveling at the path that had brought them all to this point. 7 years earlier, he had been a man paralyzed by grief, going through the motions of living without really engaging with life. Now, he was the father of 7 children, with an 8th and 9th on the way, surrounded by more love and chaos and purpose than he had ever imagined possible. The phone call that had started it all, Sarah Martinez asking if he could take in 2 traumatized twins, had seemed like the end of his quiet, controlled existence. Instead, it had been the beginning of a life more abundant and meaningful than any he could have planned or anticipated. And the best part was knowing that the story was still being written, still evolving with each new child who needed what their unusual, wonderful family had learned to provide. Jasmine Williams arrived on a cold November evening with nothing but a diaper bag, a car seat, and the kind of exhausted determination that Marcus recognized from his own journey through impossible circumstances. At 17, she looked both older and younger than her years. Older in the weariness around her eyes, younger in the way she held 6-month-old Lily protectively against her chest, as if the baby were the only anchor in a world that had proven unreliable. "I want to be clear about something right up front," Jasmine said, as Marcus helped her carry her few belongings into the house. "I'm not looking for parents or people to take care of me. I just need a safe place to sleep while I figure out how to make this work. Lily and I are a package deal, and I'm the one responsible for her." Her defensiveness was familiar, though it came from a different source than Sophia's had years earlier. Jasmine wasn't protecting herself from adults who had failed her. She was protecting herself from well-meaning people who might try to take over decisions that she felt belonged to her as Lily's mother. Marcus nodded respectfully. "Understood. Our role is to provide housing and support, not to make decisions for you or Lily. You're the parent here." Something in Jasmine's posture relaxed slightly at his acknowledgement of her authority over her own life and child. She had clearly expected to have to fight for recognition of her autonomy, and Marcus's immediate respect for her parental role seemed to surprise her. The integration of Jasmine and Lily into the household required adjustments that no one had fully anticipated. Baby. Lily's sleep schedule disrupted everyone's routines, but in ways that brought unexpected joy rather than frustration. Carlos appointed himself as Lily's official entertainer, creating elaborate puppet shows and singing sessions that delighted the baby and gave Jasmine precious moments to shower or study. Emma and Sophia became invaluable resources for practical parenting advice, having helped care for younger siblings and absorbed years of Marcus's parenting strategies. They showed Jasmine techniques for soothing fussy babies, shared shortcuts for managing diaper changes and feeding schedules, and offered the kind of peer-to-peer support that felt less threatening than adult guidance. Ethan and Diego channeled their technical and artistic skills into creating solutions for the challenges of caring for an infant in a busy household. Ethan designed a baby monitor system that allowed Jasmine to hear Lily from anywhere in the house, while Diego created a series of colorful mobiles and sensory toys that kept the baby engaged during tummy time and play sessions. Malik, whose analytical mind had proven invaluable during Marcus's recovery, helped Jasmine organize her schoolwork and develop study schedules that accommodated Lily's needs. Aisha became Jasmine's workout partner, encouraging her to join in family sports activities as a way to manage stress and maintain physical health during the demanding early months of motherhood. Dorothy's role evolved once again, this time into something resembling a masterclass instructor in practical life skills. She taught Jasmine how to cook nutritious meals on a tight budget, how to manage household finances, and how to navigate the bureaucratic systems that controlled access to resources like childcare assistance and educational support. The thing about being a young mother, Dorothy explained to Jasmine during one of their cooking lessons, is that everyone assumes you don't know what you're doing because of your age. But age doesn't automatically make someone a good parent. Love and commitment do. You have both of those in abundance. Dorothy's validation meant everything to Jasmine, who had grown accustomed to judgment and skepticism from adults who saw her teenage pregnancy as evidence of poor judgment, rather than recognizing her fierce dedication to providing the best possible life for her daughter. The most unexpected development was how Lily's presence affected the family's emotional dynamics. The baby's innocent joy and complete trust created a focal point for nurturing that brought out protective instincts in everyone. Children who had learned to guard their own hearts found themselves completely vulnerable to a baby's smile, and the experience of caring for someone so completely dependent reminded them all of the healing power of unconditional love. Marcus watched these interactions with wonder and growing understanding of how their family had become a place where healing happened not just for children who had been hurt, but for anyone who needed to learn or remember what love looked like in action. 6 months after Jasmine's arrival, the family faced their biggest test yet. Emma was graduating high school and had been accepted to several universities, including her first choice, school 3 states away. The decision about whether to leave home for college forced everyone to confront questions about independence, family loyalty, and what it meant to grow up in a chosen family where everyone had arrived. Through circumstances beyond their control, "I want to go," Emma confided to Marcus during one of their evening walks around the neighborhood that had become their tradition for discussing important matters. "The pre-med program at Northwestern is exactly what I need for medical school, but I feel guilty about leaving when there's still so much happening here." Marcus recognized the complexity of Emma's situation. Unlike children who grew up in traditional families, Emma had never experienced the luxury of taking family stability for granted. Her protective instincts toward her siblings were stronger than typical because she had once been responsible for their emotional survival in ways that most older siblings never experienced. "Emma," Marcus said carefully, "one of the most important things we've all learned in this family is that love doesn't diminish with distance or change. You leaving for college doesn't mean you're abandoning anyone. It means you're doing what you need to do to become the person you're meant to be." Their conversation was interrupted by Sophia, catching up to them, slightly out of breath from running to join their walk. "Are you two having the college conversation without me?" she demanded. Though her tone was playful rather than accusatory, Emma laughed. "I was just telling Marcus about my Northwestern acceptance, and I was just telling Emma that she needs to go," Sophia said firmly. "We've all watched you work toward this for years. You're not allowed to sacrifice your dreams because you think we can't handle things without you." The family meeting that followed Emma's college decision was one of the most emotional they had ever held. Everyone understood that Emma's departure would mark a significant transition, the first time one of their core family members would leave not because of external circumstances, but because of natural developmental progression. But the discussion also revealed how much they had all grown in their understanding of what family meant. Emma's leaving for college wasn't a loss. It was an expansion of their family's reach and influence. She would carry the values and relationships they had, built together into new environments, and she would always have a home to return to when she needed grounding and support. Besides, Carlos pointed out with his characteristic optimism, now we'll have someone to visit in Chicago. I've never been to Chicago. The graduation ceremony that spring was a celebration that extended far beyond Emma's individual achievement. Marcus sat in the audience surrounded by his chosen family: Sophia, Ethan, Diego, Carlos, Malik, Aisha, Jasmine holding baby Lily, and Dorothy beaming with pride, and realized that Emma's success represented something larger than academic accomplishment. She was the first child from their family to graduate high school with plans for higher education. But more importantly, she was living proof that children who had experienced early trauma and instability could not only survive, but thrive when provided with consistent love and support. Emma's valedictorian speech brought tears to everyone's eyes, but it was her closing remarks that captured the essence of what their family had become. They say it takes a village to raise a child, but I've learned that sometimes villages form themselves around children who need them. My family wasn't created by biology or legal documents. It was created by people who chose to show up for each other every single day, even when that choice was difficult or inconvenient. She paused to look directly at Marcus and Dorothy before continuing. I'm graduating today, not just because I worked hard or because I'm smart, but because I grew up in a house where everyone believed I could succeed and where everyone contributed to making that success possible. That's the kind of village I want to help create for other people, wherever my life takes me. The standing ovation that followed felt like recognition not just of Emma's achievements, but of the model of family and community they had all built together. 2 years later, Marcus stood in his backyard watching a scene that would have been impossible to imagine when he first answered Sarah Martinez's phone call about 2 traumatized twins who needed emergency placement. Sophia, now 18 and preparing for her own college departure, was teaching Diego and Carlos how to change baby Lily's diaper, while Jasmine finished her own high school graduation requirements through evening classes. Ethan, 16 and already accepted into early admission programs for computer engineering, was building an elaborate playground structure with Malik and Aisha, who had officially been adopted the previous year after their grandmother's condition made it clear she would never be able to resume their care. Emma was home for summer break, working as a counselor at a local camp for foster children while maintaining her pre-med studies. Her presence filled the house with the kind of energy that comes from someone who has found their calling and is pursuing it with passion and purpose. Dorothy, now in her late 80s but still remarkably sharp and active, sat in the shade reading to a new addition, 3-year-old Kevin, whose placement with them was supposed to be temporary but was looking increasingly permanent as his mother worked through substance abuse treatment. The scene was chaotic and beautiful and completely normal in its extraordinariness. This was what family looked like when it was built on choice rather than chance, when it was sustained by commitment rather than convenience. Marcus's phone rang, interrupting his contemplation of the organized chaos in his backyard. The caller ID showed Sarah Martinez's number, and Marcus found himself smiling before he even answered. After all these years, her calls no longer brought anxiety about disruption and change. They brought excitement about new possibilities for their family to grow and serve. Marcus, Sarah's familiar voice came through the phone. I know this is short notice, but we have a situation I think you might be interested in. There's a sibling group of 4, ages 2 to 10, who need immediate placement together. Their foster family had a medical emergency and can't continue caring for them. Marcus looked out at his backyard full of children who had all arrived under similar circumstances, each of them proof that love could multiply infinitely when it was shared freely and unconditionally. Tell me about them, he said, already mentally, calculating sleeping arrangements and school enrollment procedures. As Sarah described the children's circumstances and needs, Marcus felt the familiar flutter of nervous excitement that came with the prospect of expanding their family once again. 11 children would push their resources and capabilities to new limits, but he had learned over the years that families like theirs didn't operate according to conventional logic about capacity and limitations. After hanging up the phone, Marcus called everyone together in the backyard for an impromptu family meeting. As he described the new children who might be joining them, he watched the faces around him light up with enthusiasm and determination. "So, what do you think?" he asked after presenting all the relevant information. "Are we ready for 4 more? Her unanimous response was immediate and wholehearted. Yes. Dorothy smiled as she listened to the children already making plans for welcoming their new siblings, remembering the scared, lonely man who had once hesitated to take in 2 children because he wasn't sure he could handle the responsibility. That man had been replaced by someone who had learned the most important lesson about family. Love doesn't diminish when it's shared, it multiplies. And the family they had built together was living proof that the most beautiful stories often begin with a simple willingness to say yes when someone needs help. As the sun set over their backyard full of children who had found each other through loss and chosen to stay together through love, Marcus realized that his story wasn't really about a single dad who gave orphaned twins a home. It was about what happens when broken hearts decide to heal each other, when strangers decide to become family, and when one person's willingness to help creates a ripple effect that touches lives in ways they never could have imagined. The phone call that had changed everything those years ago hadn't been an ending to his quiet, predictable life. It had been the beginning of a love story that continued to write itself with each new child who needed what their extraordinary chosen family had learned to provide: unconditional love, unshakable commitment, and the unbreakable belief that everyone deserves a place where they belong. The story would continue tomorrow when 4 new children arrived, and it would continue beyond that with whatever needs and possibilities the future might bring. Because that's what families like theirs did. They kept growing, kept loving, and kept proving that the best families aren't always the ones you're born into, but the ones that choose you and refuse to let you go. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.